and the Russians. Russians, are you trying to stop this kind of discussion? Trump? We're going to continue. Anyway, I was saying in terms of sanctuary cities, make sure if you are a sanctuary city that your city officials are working hard to protect people who are particularly deferred action for childhood arrivals, young people particularly, but anybody who is here who deserves the rule of law. The rule of law with regard to deportation, not just people rounded up. And also make sure if you're a sanctuary city that you really are a sanctuary. And the other thing you can do is help your city to become a sanctuary city if it is not already a sanctuary city. Let me just go on. Are you still here? Are you with me? Are you kind of hearing this? All right. I want to just say something about Trump's personnel. And it is very important that we respond, act, and rally around some of the worst personnel decisions. I mean, this fellow, Steve Bannon, is a known bigot. And I mean, there is reason to believe, a lot of reason to believe, he is a white supremacist, and he has been the publisher and moving force behind Breitbart News and saying that it is an alt-right outlet. Well, this man should not be steps away from the Oval Office or even a mile within the White House perimeter. And he should be nowhere close to power. I think that is one thing that we can and must rally against and make a huge fuss and a huge comment about. I mean, let our voices be heard. I think next on Supreme Court picks, very, very soon, there's going to be no really constraint, because you have a Republican Senate. It's very likely that the Republican Senate, I believe, is going to move for a 51 rule, a 51 vote rule, and therefore get Trump's picks in. We don't know who Trump is picking with regard to the Merrick Garland seat. I'm calling it the Merrick Garland seat, because Merrick Garland was nominated, and the Senate didn't act on that nomination. But we must be very careful to know everything we can about that nominee and not allow somebody to be there who is not willing to respect precedents, Supreme Court precedents, such as Roe against Wade. One of the things that seems to me to be most fragile right now is a woman's right to choose in terms of Roe against Wade. So that's another thing here on this webpage and elsewhere we'll be talking about, but you be prepared to be vigilant and make a huge fuss about that. I want to say something. Now, this is a lot of verbiage, but I want to just explain it to you. I'm talking about a peaceful resistance network that enables all of us to mobilize and organize and get informed about what is about to happen. Remember, it's 66 days until Donald Trump takes over the reins of the federal government, and the Republicans with both houses of both chambers of Congress are going to be able to give him whatever he wants. And soon the Supreme Court may be his as well. So what we need, and I actually would appreciate anybody out there with technical skills, and maybe some people are already building this, but this is important. We need a peaceful resistance network that, first of all, has daily bulletins. Daily bulletins, the allowance, we need to be vigilant in the sense that we need to know on a daily basis what's happening in the agencies. The Securities and Exchange Commission, the Federal Trade Commission, at the level of detail daily, what assaults are being planned on our rights, on civil rights, on our statutory rights. We need that level of detail, and so we need those daily bulletins. Not only a peaceful resistance network in terms of a web page that we can all go to, but also we need it curated. We need people who are going to be able to provide that information. I'll do my best, but I'm just one person. We also need daily actions. We need to be told every morning what actions we can take that have very high leverage. Whether it is a demonstration, whether it is just a blitzing with telephone calls and emails and every other way we can get our particular member of Congress threatening our particular Republican member of Congress that if he or she votes with Trump on something, they will no longer be our member of Congress, working with others. We need, though, to know what those daily actions need to be, what we can do every day to stop what Trump and his Republican allies are likely to do. And that they need to be high leverage, working with Congress, the House and Senate, the President, or against the House and Senate, the President, also agencies and agency rulemakings. There is going to be a civil service. There is a permanent civil service in Washington. Many of those people do not want to see their work destroyed and our government destroyed. They also may be capable of helping with regard to just letting us know what's happening. And also at the state level, and I'll get to the state level in just a moment. And we need also, in this peaceful resistance network, we need to understand how we can connect with others, how we can link up with other grassroots groups around the country. And I don't mean just in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and Berkeley, and San Francisco, and liberal enclaves. I'm talking about grassroots groups that I know are already doing incredibly important work in red states, who are working on the ground in Colorado, in Minnesota, in Idaho. I know many of these people in Iowa, but they need to be linked up, and we need to link up with them so they can help us organize and mobilize ourselves. I just did a little drawing of what we are and who we can be. Number 6 is completely gone. There is nothing there. There is an outline. There's a ghost of something that's a big fundraising machine. We need to get rid of the present Democratic Party and substitute, I think, and reinvent a brand new Democratic Party that is not just a fundraiser. I mean, the current Democratic Party is basically a huge fundraising machine going after big money. And that is not what the Democratic Party ought to be or ought to be doing. It ought to be organizing at the grassroots. It ought to be helping us develop our capacities and our network and our political revolution and our kind of peaceful resistance. Secondly, the Democratic Party basically has been paying all of this money that they have been raising, your money, if you have contributed to the Democratic Party, as I have, to high-priced lawyers, pollsters, analysts, and consultants. There's an entire industry that has fed off of the official Democratic Party, mostly in Washington and New York and a few other cities. These high-priced lawyers and pollsters and analysts and consultants do nothing. They do squat. Didn't we just learn that? They don't know anything. They're getting paid huge amounts of money by the Democratic Party to do what is completely without value. And so instead of paying them, instead of actually enabling them, we need a Democratic Party that is going to be recruiting and helping candidates, progressive candidates, starting now for the midterm elections of 2018. You've got to start now. We've got to recruit them right now. And by the way, if you want to run for office, you should. Not just in Congress or the Senate, but also city council and school boards and anything else you can get involved with. I just want to say that the real Democratic Party, the new Democratic Party, needs to be reinvented, so it's focusing right now on recruiting great progressive people for the 2018 midterms. The other thing is that the current Democratic Party thinks that the only action is elections. And the only thing it needs to do is worry about elections, but that is not. We need a Democratic Party that is going to be organizing and mobilizing between elections, a kind of continuous, ongoing mobilization of this resistance, this peaceful resistance to Trump, and also pushing forward where we can progressive ideas. And I'm going to get to that in a moment. Number 7, if you happen to be fortunate enough to live in a progressive state or a city. By the way, there are now only 6 states that have a Democratic governor and a Democratic legislature. And 2 of them several of them are pretty small. Delaware, Rhode Island, Hawaii, and then you have California, and you have Washington, or is it Oregon? But there are only 6 of them. You've got 24 states that have Republican governors and Republican legislatures. So if you happen to be in one of the very few Democratic states that has an opportunity to push forward on the environment, let's not give up on these. I mean, we do have to protect what we have, but push forward at the state level on the environment, on health care, on tax policy, on getting money out of politics, on ending mass incarceration and police brutality. We've got many other things. The progressive voice needs to be heard at the state level, not just in these states, but in your state, to the extent that you can, even if you're not in one of these states. Remember, maybe you don't remember, Fighting Bob La Follette at the state level. Fighting Bob, he was called, in Wisconsin. And he set the stage. He helped, along with other progressives at the turn of the last century, they helped maintain and develop the progressive ideals that became central to Teddy Roosevelt's administration and then to his 5th cousin's administration, Franklin D. Roosevelt. So they keep the flame alive. The number 8, lawyers. Lawyers out there, if you are a lawyer, if you're trained as a lawyer, will you please, and I would appreciate it, as so have many others, help the mobilization with regard to fighting to protect, in courts, fighting to protect civil rights and civil liberties and women's right to choose and everything else that we are in jeopardy of losing. We need you lawyers to organize. You are already, many of you are organized in various ways. Come together, help this cause, help this peaceful resistance. Another area that we need, all of us, after this election, we understand it, and that is electoral reform. And we can, at the state level, at the local level, we can push for it nationally. There are great organizations, and I will tell you about them, not today, but on this page, I'll talk about them. National popular vote. We've got to end the Electoral College. Why didn't we do it last time when we knew that it was going to cause trouble? But it is absurd that we have a popular vote that goes in one direction and an Electoral College that goes in another. We have to end the Electoral College, and there is a project called the National Popular Vote Project, which shows how it can be done without a constitutional amendment. Next, we need ranked choice voting. We need to have a system of voting so that it's not all or nothing. Thirdly, we need redistricting reform. We need to get away from gerrymandering, and the urgency is now greater than ever. It can be done. California and a few other states have taken the decisions as to what the districts are going to be out from under the legislatures, and you can help make that happen. And obviously, voter suppression, voter ID, all of the ways in which people could not vote this time around, we have got to fight and continue to fight and make sure that the right to vote is respected. One more, and maybe in some ways it is the most important. We need to reach out, and we need to reach out to people who are not in our bubble. We need to reach out to Trump voters. Now, I know some of you are saying, there's no way I can reach out. I can't even talk to them. Listen to me. They are not all bigots. They are not all xenophobes or misogynists. They are not all racists. Many of them, and I have talked to some of them, particularly over the last week, many of them voted for Donald Trump because A, they didn't like Hillary Clinton or they distrusted her, and B, they felt that the system needed to be radically changed. And in that respect, they're not all that different. In fact, some of them have the same language. They talk to me in the way Bernie Sanders talks about fundamental change, about getting our democracy back from the establishment, about getting big money out of politics. Some of these people are our allies. And it is very important that we find them, that we talk to them, that we bring them into the fold, that we reach beyond our little liberal or progressive enclaves. This is critical. And what you can do, and what I ask you to do, over the Thanksgiving holidays, for example, find people in your community, if you can find them. Talk to them. who may have voted for Donald Trump. Maybe they don't want to talk to you. Well, just sit down with them, have coffee with somebody. I know it sounds a little hokey, but it is important that we rebuild the fabric of our society, and we find people who are not just exactly like us, but who share some of the values that we all have. Now, those are 10 things that can be done, should be done, I think are very important to be done. That's not the entire list, obviously. But I wanted to give you a sense, 1 week after the election, of what we might do together. And on this page, this web page, this Facebook page, over the next days and weeks and months, we will continue to give you as best and as accurate information, constructive steps that can be taken as is possible. So let me just take your questions, all right? All right. If you have any, maybe you don't have any questions, and maybe there has been repression of even this Facebook feed. Did you hear that? Were you there when I went through those 10? Okay, Daniel Baker, what steps can we take to hold our politicians accountable and have an influence on them? Daniel, the most important thing is getting accurate information and, again, mobilizing yourself and your friends and colleagues and neighbors. And that goes back to the network that I was talking about, the importance of getting accurate information in order to hold our representatives accountable. Raquel Obregon, I am heartbroken. What can you tell me that will uplift my spirits? Raquel, I am heartbroken too. We are in despair, many of us. And I go back and forth between being heartbroken and despairing, and angry and being depressed. But for me, the best therapy is action. The best way I know to feel better about what has happened is to begin to take action to respond to it. The time for reaction is, it seems to me, coming to an end. And some people are going to need more time, and I understand that and respect that. But we've got to move from reaction to action. Brian Martinez, I want to see a gathering of working class Americans in the streets for one day of solidarity, protesting the divisive media. No politics, no religion, just pissed off Americans saying enough with a ratings obsession that puts a spotlight on what divides us. What do I think, Robert? What do you think? Brian, I think the media really are partly accountable for what has happened. The media are completely, in my book, some of them are irresponsible, starting with Fox News. I mean, Fox News and Hannity, was an ongoing infomercial for Donald Trump. But beyond Fox News, a lot of the rest of them, I mean, CNN and MSNBC and CBS, I mean, they loved to put Donald Trump on because he improved the ratings, because everybody wanted to see, what is he going to say next? What irresponsible, outrageous thing is he going to say next? So I think that we, if not reviving what used to be called the fairness doctrine, ought to basically, all of us, make our views known and make sure that the media is somehow held accountable for what has happened here. Candace Langford, can you acknowledge today in office hours that people living in die-hard red states may need different strategies to institute change? Candace, obviously, people who are in red state strongholds where it looks like there is an absolute entrenchment, a lock grip on the political process, do need different ways of responding. But what I'm suggesting to you today, in reaching out to Trump voters and reaching out to at least independents and some Republicans who agree with the populist message of Bernie Sanders. I may have told you this before, but when I was on my book tour with Saving Capitalism, I asked my publishers to take me to red states. And I went to red states and I talked to people a year ago who were trying to decide. They told me they were trying to decide between Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump. And I didn't understand what was going on. What I now understand is 2016 was not just a conservative kind of proto-fascist if you want to use that term, or authoritarian revolt. It was basically an anti-establishment revolt against the powerful, the privileged, against big money, against all the forces that many people think have held them back and have rigged the game. So you have a lot of allies in red states, and if you are in red states, that you may not know of. And the way you begin to understand that is creating the kind of network that I'm talking about. Sammy Russo, has something like this ever happened in America's past? What were the consequences, good or bad? Sammy, I am old enough to remember when, for example, Richard Nixon was elected. I mean, that seemed to me to be the end of the world, and, Robert Kennedy had been assassinated, Martin Luther King Jr. had been assassinated, our cities were up in flames and in riots, the Vietnam War was escalating, my friends were going to war, I was in danger of being drafted, and Richard Nixon was elected. I mean, I had thought up until now that it could not get worse. Now, may be worse in many respects, in terms of the kind of person who is now going to head up our government. But what I learned then is it is important not to give up the fight, not to become cynical, not to say, well, what's the use? Just the opposite. What we have to do is become more activated, stronger, more determined, and work together. Daniel Loradich, why are you immediately looking for a resistance? Shouldn't we at least give him a chance? Daniel, I hope for the best, but we've got to prepare for the worst. When I see Donald Trump deciding that Steve Bannon is going to be his strategist in the White House, that confirms my worst feelings. When I hear that Rudy Giuliani is in line to become Secretary of State, somebody who has absolutely no experience and who seems to me to be a little bit off his rocker, just my opinion, then I start saying to myself, we've got to prepare for the worst. When I look at Donald Trump, at what he said during the campaign, and the kind of history he has, and my assessment that the next president of the United States is a pathological narcissist, I say to myself, we've got to be prepared for the worst. So yes, hope for the best, but be prepared for the worst. Melanie Weiss, do you think this election, along with other global shocks, that is Brexit, India's current prime minister, and so on, are somehow correlated to the 2008 recession? Do people want change so badly, no matter what kind of change, that they're resorting to extremes? Melanie, here's what I think has happened. And this goes for the United States, it goes for Europe, it goes for many places around the world. You have a lot of people who are afraid. They're afraid economically. They are on a downward escalator economically. When people are afraid, when they are under economic stress, they are very susceptible to demagogues who come along and take that fear and they channel it towards scapegoats. That's what has happened historically over and over and over again. And that's what we have got to understand has animated it. It's not that people suddenly have turned bigoted in this country. It's that we have had demagogues, and particularly one big demagogue, who has told people that the reason you are so frightened, the reason things are going bad, is because of immigrants and because of Mexicans and because of Muslim Americans and indirectly African Americans and even not such a subtle hint of anti-Semitism. And that's what we need to be worried about. And it is also occurring in Europe. The right-wing groups, the nativist groups that are growing around the world are responding to the kind of possibility. They're taking advantage of economic stresses. Tamora Marshall, please consider making this revolution outside the Democratic Party. There are many Republicans like myself seeking the revolution. We're just as shocked, saddened, and grieving this election as you. Tamora, I could not agree more with you. And that's why I said item number 10 on my list is for us to all reach out and join together. What our primary values are, yours as a Republican and mine as a Democrat, is what? To get big money out of politics, to get rid of corporate welfare, to make sure that no bank is too big to fail ever again, to make sure that the country and our economy and the circle of prosperity is widening and widening for more and more and more people. So we genuinely have equal opportunity in this country. That's different from equality of outcome. I'm talking about equality of opportunity. So your ideals and my ideals on these basics are very, very similar, Tamara, and that's why we have got to have a people's party. Well, I'm not sure we need a third party. Maybe we do, but we certainly have to have a massive organization. Judy Dunlop, what can be done about the obstacle we have in the U.S. media? I personally stopped watching news channels inside the U.S. Jody, let me just say to you, I share your skepticism about the media right now, particularly after what has happened in this election, but it would be very dangerous for all of us to assume that the media cannot be trusted at all. Because then what do we do for information? Then we allow what? The kind of bottom feeders of the internet to tell us what is actually happening, and we allow Donald Trump to tell us what he thinks is the truth when he has done nothing but lie to the American people? No, we need to focus on those media sources that we can trust. Next question. Jeff Zarinelli. Bob, if we have to start a third party, do you think we have a large enough base to make an impact in 2020? Jeff, I worry about starting a third party for the simple reason, and we've talked about this before, but let me stress this, that under our Constitution, the states, in fact, right now, the states can do what they want, but we now have 48 out of 50 states that have an all or nothing, winner-take-all system. So that if you have a third party, that third party is a very difficult, if not impossible, challenge anytime soon with regard to getting enough votes, to getting any electors. I mean, the last third party candidate that got any electors at all was George Wallace, and that's because he was a regional candidate. And I don't want a third party to take away from the Democratic Party or a progressive Democratic Party. So I am sympathetic. I think if the Democratic Party does not mend its ways, totally reinvent itself, then I think we have no choice but to start a third party, but let's at least wait. Sam Rosenblum, we should create a hashtag, when they go low, we go high, challenge to enable people to respond to acts of hate with acts of love. Sam, I agree completely. Karen Gross, what are the odds we can convince the majority of the Electoral College to vote for Hillary? Karen, they are zero. And even if we could, think of the chaos that would ensue. Okay, this is our last question. Jennifer Wang, do you know what charities, organizations we should donate to? Jennifer, there are some great organizations. I will post a lot of this on this webpage. The ACLU, obviously, we have a little organization ourselves that's putting out videos, Inequality Media, but we'll give you more information later on. Yes, I think supporting organizations that are really making a difference is extremely important, but that is no substitute for you, yourself, getting out there and being engaged and active. The days when we can just write a check or assume that making a payment is our job and our mission and is our kind of sufficient response to politics are now over. So thank you all. We'll be back next week. I wish I could be upbeat and ebullient, my normal positive self. I am frankly too worried about what is going to happen in 66 days. That's why we need to organize and mobilize and energize right now. Thank you.